are more stratification systems for understanding, or more stratification theories, basically. We looked at Karl Marx, and now we're going to look at some of the other ones who are influential in forming what we think about social stratification. Max Weber is our first. He is a response to Karl Marx. Karl Marx believed very strongly in a two-class system. The owners are the means of production and everybody else. Max Weber, though, says that social class is way more complex than that. It is more than two. Because it is what we perceive social class to be, those things we perceive to be real become real under consequences. So if we perceive that there are more social classes, then there are more social classes. Now, you can make an argument that there are two. You can make a very strong argument that there are two and take Karl Marx's side. However, what that would be for Max Weber is if we have a 9-class system, then you have 1 and then you have 2 plus 9, occupying 1. And that's not the way we visualize it. We visualize it, we perceive it, we act as though we have more than 2 social classes. And it's also just more than the owners of means of production. It also includes power and prestige. There's a lot more elements to social class than just your wealth. It is what power you have, what family you come from, what religions you belong to, what occupation you do. All of those add up together to fit into your social class. Georg Simmel gives us life chances versus life choices, where the chances are that likelihood and the choices are the choices. So when you apply this to social class, what you see is that each social class kind of provides you a menu with a price tag on that menu for the things that you would choose. So if you have on the menu going to Harvard, I want to go to Harvard, I've always wanted to go to Harvard, this is my dream, I'm doing it, this is my choice. What is the likelihood of making that choice? Depending on your social class. If you are in the upper 1% and your grandfather went to Harvard and your uncles went to Harvard and your dad went to Harvard and your family has bought a couple buildings at Harvard and there's a dorm named after your grandmother, well, guess what? You're going to Harvard, right? It's an easy decision. It's a really cheap, easy decision. Other social classes, it's not such an easy, cheap decision. It's very difficult to get in. You have to try everything. You have to start in 6th grade if you want to go to Harvard and start focusing yourself and working really hard on your grades and your volunteer activities and maximizing your potential in the testing. And it's a much more expensive decision, even if you get chosen. One of my daughter's friends got accepted to Yale, and it was going to be incredibly expensive. So she went to UAB. So she made that choice. That was her individual choice. Looking at her menu for her social class, she made that choice because Yale was too expensive of a choice. UAB was a much, much better, more reasonable choice. And so that's that life chances, life choices. We do make choices. We make individual choices. We have freedom of choice. We have all of these things. However, the menu may change depending on the social class, what is available to us, and how difficult that is to achieve, depending on your social class. Talcott Parsons likes to map the entire world. He is very much a functionalist. He's a product of the early 1900s. And I put him in here just because he puts social class in here, situational conditions, those things, that the amount of money that you have, the amount of resources that you have, the power that you have. And he tries to say, well, you're an actor. Let's imagine you are an actor. You are a human making decisions, and you have a goal. So, as a parent, as a mom, something that I have to decide on pretty much every day is, what are we having for supper? Because due to values, norms, and other ideas about how the world works, it's kind of my job to figure out. Now, my kids are older, they can cook now. It was a much more so when they were younger. When you have a 3-year-old, they can't make their own supper. So it's kind of expected that a grown-up in the house will provide this for the family. And that grown-up in the house is more than likely going to be the mom who is making that decision. So norms, values, and other ideas. Those other conditions, though, how much money do you have? Do you have access to a store? Are you going to be home at any time to cook things? When my daughter was swimming from 5:45 to 7:30, 4 nights a week, Supper was hard because it would have to be crock pot or instant pot or something like that because nobody was there to actually be at the stove. Do you have a stove? Do you have a place in which you can store pantry items? Do you have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? Do you just have a microwave or just have a hot plate? So those situational conditions, and some of those situational conditions can be class-based or class-influenced between you and that thing that you want to do. So every decision is within this. You think of your options. Option one, pizza. Isn't that always the biggest one? And now we have DoorDash. I love DoorDash. We have DoorDash. We also have crockpot and instant pot, and we have other odds and ends of things that we can do. And likes and dislikes of your family, needs, who's going to be home, who's not going to be home. So you come up with all your options and eventually you make a decision. But what we don't think about is how that decision is framed. Where is the frame in that decision? The actor to the norms, to the goals, the actor to the situational conditions, to the goals. And that set of means that we choose from is also still influenced by the situational conditions and the norms, values, and ideas. We wrap up with Pierre Bourdieu, and I misspelled it again. I can't spell Bourdieu correctly. I just realized that. But Bourdieu makes the argument that social classes are cultures, basically, that you have a lifestyle. He calls it a habitus. We'll see that on the next page. But it's a lifestyle. The things that you do as a member of your social class, other people in your social class also do those things. So if you move social classes, you have culture shock. You have to learn new values, beliefs, norms, behaviors, all those things that come along with cultural change. Now, my mom grew up very poor on a farm in central Nebraska. She married my dad, who went to college on a military thing. So he was an officer, and she became an officer's wife. And back in the day, 1963, when she got married, they had officer's wife training school for these new women from the farm that were marrying these brand new officers. They learned how to throw parties. They learned how to set tables. They learned how to wear the gloves and the heels and do your hair and do all the stuff that you're supposed to do to support your husband's career. So my mom had a bunch of culture shock going from very poor farm, labor-intensive farm work to officer's wife school. And that really, when she would tell me those stories, I was like, eh. But I read Bourdieu, and it's like, that's right. That's the one big thing. You carry your social class. If you grow up in a social class, you carry that with you. Your family is still there sometimes. You leave that social class, and it's a barrier between you and your family when you leave. It's a real change. It's a real culture shock. It's a real learning experience that you have to go through when you leave them. So those patterns of living. So basic principles of social stratification. It is a trait of society. Our class system is structure. It is not individual differences, it is structure. The class system existed and then we were born. And then the class system exists and other people will be born into it. We may bear other people into it. It persists over generations. We had this little blip in productivity and expansion in the 1950s and 60s. But for the most part, social mobility is quite slow. It persists over generations. Generations stay in the same social class, other than that little historical anomaly of the 50s and 60s. We have been very stagnant since the early 1970s. We have very little social mobility, and social mobility is structural. Structural mobility is like mobility of the whole. Individuals can still have social mobility, but just being here doesn't necessarily give you social mobility like it did in the 1950s. It is universal but variable. Every society does this. Every society has a stratification system. And it involves not just inequality but beliefs, because another remnant of Karl Marx and his infrastructure superstructure is that everything supports the system of stratification, everything. So when we looked at conflict theory in the beginning, I said that conflict theory identifies the dominant group and the subordinate group or groups and focuses on how is this okay? Why is this okay? Why is everybody okay with this? And I've got my little sneetch back here because I like to use the sneetches to talk about that. Nice little Dr. Seuss thing about the sneetches with stars. I got a fancy one, sneetches without stars. And the process, the training, the behavior, everything they do in that cartoon to completely separate those two groups of people and to justify that separation and to continue that separation from one generation to the next. It's not just that you have separation, but you must justify it and everybody must be okay with it. Whatever that class system is, we all have to be okay with it.